thank you, sir, for that prayer. And we thank God for each and every one of you joining with us to go through this Numbers chapter 20. And this is a really interesting chapter. Remember what we have already gone through. We've dealt with the difficulties that happened because there was a challenge to people trying to do what they wanted to do as opposed to following what God wanted. So we saw Dathan and Abiram, we saw Korah, we saw even, remember when Miriam confronted Moses, and we saw all of these various things, and the people complaining, and then we saw the people didn't want to go up into the land when they went to go spy it out, and they came back and they complained about that because they said the people in the land are like grasshoppers, and the people in the land are like giants, and compared to us, we look like grasshoppers. And so we see all of this going on. Well, keeping in mind that all of that is part of what we deal with here on earth. There's nothing that these individuals did that we studied that at some point in time we haven't done, thought, or felt. We all go through that. We all deal with it. That's why the Word of God is applicable to all of us. But it also has things that it can produce. And what we're going to see in this chapter is what that can sometimes produce. It's not always fun. It's not always something that we will look at and go, oh, okay, it didn't matter. It didn't cost anything. It does. And you say, why does it cost? Because sin has wages. Sin costs. The scripture tells us the wages of sin is death. And they have to be paid. And they are going to be paid. And that's why Jesus died. Because he paid for sin. But we're going to see it in all of its flavors. Well, let me not say all of it, but in a variety of flavors here in this chapter. What happens sometimes when the costs begin to add up. Let's take a listen. This is Numbers chapter 20. Let's take a listen to this.
Chapter 20. Then came the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, into the desert of Zin in the first month. And the people abode at Kadesh. And Miriam died there and was buried there. And there was no water for the congregation. And they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. And the people chode with Moses and spake, saying,
Would God that we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. And why have ye brought up the congregation of the Lord into this wilderness, that we and our cattle should die there? And wherefore have ye made us to come up out of Egypt, to bring us in unto this evil place? It is no place of seed, or of figs, or of vines, or of pomegranates, neither is there any water to drink.
And Moses and Aaron went from the presence of the assembly unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. And they fell upon their faces, and the glory of the Lord appeared unto them. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Take the rod, and gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron thy brother, and speak ye unto the rock before their eyes. And it shall give forth his water, and thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock. So thou shalt give the congregation and their beasts drink. And Moses took the rod from before the Lord, as he commanded him. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock, and he said unto them,
Hear now, ye rebels, must we fetch you water out of this rock?
And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice. And the water came out abundantly, and the congregation drank, and their beast also. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, Because ye believed me not, to sanctify me in the eyes of the children of Israel, therefore ye shall not bring this congregation into the land which I have given them. This is the water of Meribah, because the children of Israel strove with the Lord, and he was sanctified in them. And Moses sent messengers from Kadesh unto the king of Edom.
Thus saith thy brother Israel, Thou knowest all the travail that hath befallen us, how our fathers went down into Egypt. And we have dwelt in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians vexed us, and our fathers. And when we cried unto the Lord, he heard our voice, and sent an angel,
and hath brought us forth out of Egypt. And behold, we are in Kadesh, a city in the uttermost of thy border. Let us pass, I pray thee, through thy country. We will not pass through the fields or through the vineyards, neither will we drink of the water of the wells. We will go by the king's highway. We will not turn to the right hand, nor to the left, until we have passed thy borders.
And Edom said unto him,
Thou shalt not pass by me, lest I come out against thee with the sword.
And the children of Israel said unto him,
We will go by the highway, and if I and my cattle drink of thy water, then I will pay for it. I will only, without doing anything else, go through on my feet.
And he said,
Thou shalt not go through.
And Edom came out against him with much people and with a strong hand. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through his border, wherefore Israel turned away from him. And the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, journeyed from Kadesh and came unto Mount Hor. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in Mount Hor, by the coast of the land of Edom, saying, Aaron shall be gathered unto his people, for he shall not enter into the land which I have given unto the children of Israel, because ye rebelled against my word at the water of Meribah. Take Aaron and Eleazar his son, and bring them up unto Mount Hor, and strip Aaron of his garments, and put them upon Eleazar his son. And Aaron shall be gathered unto his people, and shall die there. And Moses did as the Lord commanded, and they went up into Mount Hor in the sight of all the congregation. And Moses stripped Aaron of his garments, and put them upon Eleazar his son. And Aaron died there in the top of the mount. And Moses and Eleazar came down from the mount. And when all the congregation saw that Aaron was dead, they mourned for Aaron 30 days, even all the house of Israel.
All right. So, if you notice something with this chapter does what? It begins with death, and it ends with death. It begins with the death of Miriam, and it ends with the death of Aaron. Why? Because this chapter is very obviously trying to point out that we live in the land of the dying. David said, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Well, that's what this planet is. This is the shadow of death lives here. People say, I'm in the land of the living, and I get what they're saying, and I'm not disagreeing with that statement from how they're trying to say it. But I would also add and say, if you think on it from a different perspective, we're actually living in the land of the dying. We're not in the land of the dead, but we're in the land of the dying. Everybody here is on their way, getting closer and closer to their death. Why? Because that's the wages of sin. Why? Because sin was introduced to this planet. How? Through Adam. How? Through the temptation that was done by Satan. So we go all the way back to Genesis. And we can see that this chapter is a result of what happened in our beginnings. And our beginnings oftentimes can dictate our ends. The problem, what we got to do is, a lot of times, if you don't want your beginnings to dictate your ends, you got to create a what? A new beginning. That's why Jesus said, forget about your first birth. Don't rely on that, because that's going to definitely produce death in the natural. But if you want to live eternal, you got to be what? Born again. You got to have a new beginning. And that new beginning will dictate your end. And that end will be everlasting with the Lord. Now, what I just said just then, that basically, in a nutshell, just already described this chapter. But I'm going to go through it in a little bit more detail and just point out a few things here that I just think is nice. But basically, I've already covered this book, this chapter, because it's just dealing with death. But let's get into some of the nuts and bolts here. So it starts off and says, and then the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, they came to the desert of Zin. I find that a very interesting pun, because the word Zin from our English language is very close to the word what? Sin. Does it mean anything? Was that kind of a pun or an allegorical aspect that the scripture brings out? I don't know, but it makes me think that. Right? But also, even before the word Zin, there's the word desert. When you think of desert, what are you thinking about? Are you thinking about lush fruit and plenty of water and green? You don't see that. You just think about dirt, sand, things that are dry and has very little life. Like Hayward said, you think about things that are dead, death.
The thing about trying to survive.
Trying to survive, right? Hardship, difficulties, right? When things are scarce, people get a little what? Protective. People are not so close and sharing. When resources are very limited, people change. Right? So whereas before, yes, you can have this, you can have this. Now, if I only got a couple, what am I going to do? All right? Am I still going to walk in that nature? I'd rather give it to you and let you keep going rather than for me to have it. Selfishness picks up. And everybody, to some degree, is selfish. How we actually show it and display it or how we curtail it. Sometimes if you know yourself, one of the greatest things is to say to yourself, I know I'm selfish. And that's a good thing. Not because you're selfish, but because you know you're selfish. And you say, well, is that wrong or bad? No, because you're born in sin. You're going to have some issues with you. The key, though, is do you recognize it in yourself? Do you see it? And then be able to say, okay, I'm selfish, so let me try not to exhibit my selfishness. And let me try to, that's why Paul said, I keep my flesh under my feet. It's not, and the flesh represents all my little sinful activities and sinful things and sinful thoughts and sinful attitudes that I'll have. But Paul said, I recognize that I have it. I'm going to try to keep them under my feet. I'm not going to try to exhibit it. It is me. It's who I am. But I got to make it. Desert life brings that stuff out. We don't hide as much. We get a little bit more ruthless, right, dealing with the desert. But look at what it continues to say. All right, and so it says, and the people abode in Kadesh. And look what it says there. And Miriam died there and was buried. Then it goes on to the next verse. It starts talking about the conditions. There's no eulogy for Miriam. There's no outlaying of discussion about her. This was Moses' oldest sister, the one that challenged Moses when Moses took that second wife because she was of an African descent, dark-skinned. And Miriam was also the one that got her tambourine and began to play when they came out of the Red Sea and had the victorious situation over the armies of Egypt. But none of that is mentioned here. It's just she came to this desert place, and Miriam died in the desert. Right? And you can just look at that, and the Spirit of God within you can speak to you about that. I mean, she didn't die in the land of milk and honey. She didn't die in the plush lands. She died in the desert. And sometimes, even though there's no eulogy about her, I just think it's just a sad situation. But we're not done here. She still was part of God's people, but you could be part of God's people and still have issues. And she had issues, no doubt about it. But let's keep going. Verse 2. And there was no water for the congregation, and they gathered themselves together against Moses and against Aaron. So like I said, when things have desert conditions, people get, all kinds of ways. There's a desert condition, and now folks are like, we need to go and deal with Moses and Aaron. Attitudes kick up. We don't hide it. I'm not keeping that stuff under my foot anymore. I'm not doing what Paul said. I'm in this desert. Things are not the way I like it, and I'm going to let my flesh come out a little bit rather than try to hold down that which I know I have. Right? And so it begins to come out. And it says in verse 3, and the people chid with Moses and spake, saying, would to God we had died when our brethren died before the Lord. So now they're saying, I wish we had died back when Korah and the 250 other leaders and Dathan and Abiram. I wish we had died then. Now what that says to me is no lack of confidence in God. And that's what you say, well, yeah, they certainly don't. But now we read that and we go, they should be trusting God. Well, let's turn the mirror around to ourselves. Should we trust God when we're in our desert situation? When we don't have what we want? When things are not going our way? Or are we looking for somebody to blame? Things are not going the way I want them. I don't like it. And it's somebody's fault. Somebody's doing this. Because a lot of times, it ain't me. So these people are not saying, well, it's not me. I didn't bring us to the desert. Of course you didn't. But they're going to then say, well, it was Moses and Aaron. They're the ones that brought us to this waterless desert. But that's not the case either. And if you think about it, the reason that they're actually in the desert and not in the promised land, if you go back a few chapters, is because what? They had fear and didn't go into the land where God said it's milk and honey, because they saw giants. They didn't see God's word, they saw the giants. And they didn't go. So now where are they? Now they're back in the desert. They're wandering around and they're back in the desert. And God had already said, because of that, everybody except for Joshua and Caleb will die in the wilderness. And what we're seeing now is this actually happening. Let's keep going. And so now they're complaining. Look at verse 4. And why have ye brought up the congregation of the Lord unto this wilderness, and we and our cattle should die there? All right, so once again, they're looking at Moses, but it's really who? It's them, and God already told them. See, if he says you're going to die in the wilderness, you're going to have to die from what? From something. All right? And so what he's letting them know that, yeah, and we're going to see some other things that are going to come along where people are going to be dying from things that, that they are around. We'll see that in a few other chapters. All right? Verse 5. And wherefore have ye made us to come up out of Egypt? Now they're going all the way back. You shouldn't have even took us out of Egypt. I wish I was back in sin. That's where their heart is. You see? Egypt is a type of sin. So they're saying, I would have preferred to live in sin than to live with God in this wilderness and in this desert. Because and what they're doing, they're not looking at things right. Because they were enslaved, they were beaten, they were mistreated. But the nostalgic aspect of how they were remembering it, all they remember is, well, we did have something to eat. Yeah, but you eating leftovers and slop and your bellies were full of things that were not truly nutritious to you. You were just getting what the Egyptians didn't want or whatever they decided to let you have. But a lot of times we start romancing the devil on how at least, well, he pat us on the back and gave us a hand every now and then. That's just to keep you from leaving and quitting. But the reality of it is it wasn't that wonderful. They're just remembering it wrong. All right, but people will do that. They want to go back to sin. It's why you took us out of Egypt to bring us unto this evil place. So they're calling the place where God has led them a what? An evil place.
Evil place.
Now, I highlighted that word because what that tells us is that God will bring you to places that are difficult. And you say, well, why would he do that? The only reason that is consistent in every situation is so you will trust him. What is it?
Faith.
Without faith. It's impossible to please him. So you have to learn that if I'm in this situation, obviously God wants me to lean on him. Not lean on my own understanding. Not lean on what I think I know. Not lean on, because when you lean on your own understanding, you're leaning wrong. All right? Everybody tries to lean on their own understanding, but those things are not the Lord's ways a lot of the time. All right, lean on to. We need to trust in the Lord and not on our own understanding. But then they begin to outline some things that they want. There is, it is no place of seed. They don't got no seed for harvest or eating. No figs, no vines, no pomegranates. Neither is there any water to drink. So what are they thinking about? I'm thinking about everything that can feed my what? My natural body.
That's their own understanding.
That's how they see it. Their own understanding. That's
Temporal.
all I can see. Not realizing that they are following God. And God will take care of their spiritual man. But if your spiritual man is less important to you than your natural man, then you're going to be frustrated. Because the spiritual man, for some people, that's just a way for me to get to the sources that I can get to bring what I want to my natural man. So a lot of times people, they got it all wrong. They're trying to build up the spiritual man so that they can feed the natural man who they love the most, rather than using the natural man to find means to feed the spiritual man who you should love most. But we get it twisted. But let's keep going. Verse 6. And Moses and Aaron went forth from the presence of the assembly unto the door of the tabernacle of the congregation, and they fell upon their faces. Keep that in mind. When the people came to them with this problem, what did they do? They went to the tabernacle of congregation, the assembly, where they're supposed to go and speak to God, and they fell upon their faces. And then when they did that, what happened? And the glory of the Lord appeared unto them. Now, I want you to keep that in the back of your mind, because we're going to talk about that going forward. But so they went to talk to God, and look what verse 7 says. And the Lord spake unto Moses. All right. And what did he say? He said, take a rod and gather thou the assembly together, thou and Aaron, thy brother, and speak look what it says. And what? And speak. What does it say? And speak. Speak ye unto the rock. What do you do to the rock?
Smack it.
Speak. You speak to the rock. Right? That's what you're supposed to do, right? Before the eyes, and you're going to do this so they can see you. Gather them together so they can see what you're going to do. And they're going to see you speak to the rock. Now, that's important, because when Moses and Aaron had that problem, when they came to them and said there's no water, what did Moses and Aaron do? They came to the tabernacle, they fell upon their face, and they spoke to God. See, so it's a simple pattern here. See the same symbolism here. Going, speak, speak. And now God is reinforcing what you just did to bring the problem. You came and spoke to me. So now I want you to go and speak to the rock. I want them to see that speaking to me, in other words, what? What's another way of saying speaking to God? It's what? Prayer. Bringing your problems to God. So even the people that were complaining should have been doing what? Praying to God. But instead of speaking to God, they went to speak to Moses and Aaron. And so what God is trying to get them to see, if you speak to me, I will hear you. All right, let's keep going. So he said, speak ye unto the rock before their eyes, and it shall give forth his water, and thou shalt bring forth to them water out of the rock, so thou shalt give the congregation and their beasts. So everybody's going to eat, everybody's going to drink, even the animals. There's going to be enough water for everybody. Look at verse 9. And Moses took the rod before the Lord as he was commanded. That was the right thing. God said, go get the rod, and he went and got the rod. So far, he's doing good. Verse 10. And Moses and Aaron gathered the congregation together before the rock. All right. God told him to do that, right? He said, get the rod and gather everybody before the rock. So far, he's doing good. Okay? And then next thing is Moses is supposed to do what? He's supposed to speak to the rock. Let's see what happens. And he said unto them, wait a minute. He's supposed to be talking to who? He's supposed to be talking to the rock. But who is he talking to? He's talking to the people. He's outlining to the people their problems and their sins and their weaknesses. God didn't tell you to do that. He didn't say talk to the people about their problems, but Moses is going to lay them out here. But that's not what God told Moses to do. All right, but let's look and see. Let's see what Moses does. And he said unto them, hear now, ye rebels. God didn't say call him a rebel. He didn't say talk to the people. He said speak to the rock. Speak to God. Must we? Who's we? Who's bringing the water out of the rock?
God.
But Moses is now seeing, look, I'm partner here with God. Moses, you're getting way ahead of yourself. You're not that in that station yet. It's not we. Must we fetch you water out of this rock? All right. So right now he's speaking out of frustration about their behavior. And God said, don't even address their behavior. Just give them the water. Speak to the rock when the rock represents Jesus, and let the water come out. Because see, we can't fix people. Moses can't change these people's attitude. They've been saying, I wish we were back in Egypt almost from the day they left. And they're still saying it. So Moses giving them this little retort is not going to change them. They're only going to be changed by God. But Moses is speaking out of frustration as well. Let's keep on. And Moses lifted up his hand, and with his rod he smote the rock twice. He was supposed to do what? Speak to the rock. Now, if you go back to the very first time when they came into the situation where they needed to have rock, the rock was, God told Moses to smite the rock. Now, what's the analogy here? The rock represents who? Jesus.
Jesus.
So Jesus, when he comes the first time, he is to be what? Crucified. In other words, he's to be smoked. He's to be hit. He's to be hit by the world to the point where he's put to death. When the rock appears the second time, he's not going to appear to be hit. Although people will try to hit him, people will try to abuse him, people will try to wish and apply death to Jesus. But when he comes the second time, that's not going to happen. And so Moses broke the pattern that the Lord was showing about the representation of the rock. All right. So Moses, he went and smote the rock a second time. But when he smote it, what happened? Did God strike him with lightning? Did God let the earth open up and swallow Moses? No. Moses did wrong, but this shows you how God is. Look what God. And the water came out abundantly. You see how God works in the midst of all of our sin, all of our corruption, God still works. Why? Because he does love us. While we were yet sinners, God loved us. So while he's doing it, he still loves us. Now, but the thing is, what did I say about this chapter? It talks about the wages of sin is what? Death. Okay, you're going to still deal with this, but it's not going to change God's love. All right? And the congregation drank, and their beasts also. So the congregation, they got what they wanted. We want water, and they got it. But not verse 12. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, because ye believe me not. All right. The thing that God put on their action was what? Unbelief. All right? And so you look at that and go, well, they believed them because they went and they hit the rock. They believed the water could come out. What did they not believe? They didn't believe that God could handle the circumstances. They said, I got to rebuke these folks. Because God didn't tell me to go and say nothing to these folks. He obviously needs my help because they need to be chastised. They need to be corrected. They need to be shown who they are. And God is going to do that. And this is the thing that we got to keep in mind. When you're told to go do God's work in front of people, what are you supposed to do? Do God's work, not your work. So a lot of times what happens is I'm going to go and I'm going to chastise and I'm going to tell folks off. But God just says, no, give them what they need. They want water. Let the water come, and they'll see that the water actually comes, because they're going to see that it's miraculous. And this is God. They're going to see that while they're complaining, God can still provide for their needs. Why? Because he loves them. This chapter is so rich in the aspect of, while you're dealing with your difficulties and the things that produce death, God is still operating in love. All right? But God is also just. And when it is time to die, when it's time for the wages of sin to be paid, guess what's going to happen? They're going to be paid in the natural. The spiritual has already been paid for us today. And they look forward to the coming Messiah. We look back to it and see it is already done. Well, we already see Miriam die. Right? And now look at what the Lord says here. Verse 12, let me read it again. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron, because ye believe me not, to sanctify me in the eyes of the people. You made the people feel that I, God, am upset with them. And one thing that sometimes is hard for us to understand, because we see scriptures that say things like God is mad with the sinner, and we look at it as mad like how we are. But God is, number one, he's never taken off guard. He's never like, wow, I didn't expect you to ever go that bad. I didn't ever expect you to go that wrong. God is never shocked by our behavior, by our sin. He's never shocked. He wasn't shocked when Satan was in the garden. He wasn't shocked when Eve, because remember, Jesus said, Father, give unto me the body that you have prepared for me before the foundations of the world. So God already knew he's going to die for sin before the world was even started. God's not shocked. All right? And so he's saying, you made them act like I was, ooh, look at what you're doing, and I needed to rebuke them. If God wanted to rebuke them, guess what God would have done? He would have told Moses, go and say this to the people. But he didn't say that. So a lot of times we forget that. And we try to be so like, well, I know God. And does Moses know God? Moses knows God. If anybody knows God, Moses does. And so in Moses' thinking, he's like, I know God, and I know God is not happy with these people continuing to complain. And Moses' philosophy may be true, but Moses' actions were still false. They operated out of unbelief. And that goes to show you that we don't have a corner on what and how God is going to act, no matter what an individual has done. Hey, did you have a question?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not a question, but I think we try to take God's place. I think Moses, because God dealt with him so much, that he figured, well, now let me punish these people for God. And God don't need him to do his job. He needs him to do what he's telling him to do, such as the rock, speak to the rock, speak to the people. I am the judge. I do the judging. I'm the one. I'm the one that brought you out of Egypt. You didn't do this. See, I think, like you said, we get it a little twisted sometimes. We try to put God in that box again. And I think that's what he was trying to do. You know, oh, God didn't like what y'all did. No, he wasn't pleased with it. But let him be the judge of that, not you. Right.
Yep. The old adage of trying to help God out. The minute you say, I'm going to try to help God, you are on the wrong end, because what you're trying to say is God is not perfect. Because if God needs help, that means he's imperfect. He needs improvement. And God doesn't need any improvement. And we have to remember that. But, in our minds, we think, well, I think it should be handled like this. I think God is like this. And I think God... And everybody has this whole concept of, I don't think God will do this. And people believe, I don't believe God will put anybody in hell. Well, that's how they feel. And a lot of people truly, believe that. I don't believe in a God. But what they're believing is a God of their own imagination.
Not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Not the God, and not the true God. We
Yes,
create God our own way, and we try to form God in our own philosophies of how we think. I think God would do this, and I think God would do that. Stop trying to think of what God would do and just follow God. Because see, if you follow God, He's going to take you where you don't want to go. If you notice that, nobody wants to be in the desert. Nobody wants to be there, to live without having the stuff that you think you need. But God will bring us. Why? Because there are things we need to know. So He will bring us to things that we don't want. I would never choose this. But He brings us there. And so what I've learned is when you get there, Lord, speak. Talk to me.
Yeah, I think, like David said, He brings us to places that we don't think we should be.
Mm-hmm.
That's where we need to be.
That's right.
So this way, when we get there, we have to learn to deal with ourselves.
That's right.
So we have to say, Lord, take over.
Mm-hmm.
Thy will be done, not mine.
Exactly.
That's what it's all about. Sometimes we want to, let's put it like this. Sometimes I want to, jump ahead of where I should be.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, I can't get there fast enough. So, like I said, slow down.
Yeah. And that's what they're doing. They're trying to get to that land of milk and honey, and
Right.
and they don't want to be in the desert.
But every time the Lord puts them there, they find a reason to complain not to go in.
Exactly.
And
That's
they're not,
so-
because they're not ready.
They're not ready.
They're not ready to deal with
Because they have no
themselves.
faith,
That's right.
Yeah.
So when they get there, they always find something wrong.
Yep.
And there's nothing wrong with the land of milk and honey.
Mm,
There's something
it's
wrong
up.
with their thinking.
Yep.
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 So if they would have had faith that God would help them defeat the giants, they would have been in the land of milk and honey already.
All right.
That's right.
But they don't have what? They're not trusting God,
Right.
and they're leaning on their own understanding.
Right. And then when they don't trust God, Moses takes it upon himself to tell them what they should do. Like you said, when they should be praying. And then just like even Moses, before he tried to chastise them, he needs to pray.
Exactly.
He needs to pray for them that they'll listen.
Yeah. And can somebody identify what the frustrations that Moses had? Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We could definitely identify.
Yes.
Like you said, Moses is wrong.
Yep.
Yeah. But just because we can identify what his frustrations, that don't make his frustrations right.
Right.
Correct. Absolutely.
So he needs to lean on God. And so that's why God says that you didn't believe me. You didn't have faith that I can handle the problem. Let me help God out, is what Moses was trying to do here.
But you look at this thing and you think about it. When God was with them in the cloud by day and the fire at night, He was with them. That they could just get the faith in knowing that if He brings you to a desert where there's nothing, being that He's God, He can make the desert a land of milk and honey. Because He's God.
He can. He can.
So He's not going to fail you.
Yeah.
And if they would have listened to David, when David said, "The Lord is my shepherd,"
No, he didn't say
and that
that.
He's never going to leave me. He's always going to be with me. And He showed them that He was with them.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
Not yet.
it's like they could see God, with the fire and the cloud. It's amazing how I see how we can get it twisted because we want it. We look at things from the natural, but God doesn't always work in the natural.
Right. And so you look at this, when I look at the desert, I say, okay, what would that equate to? All right. Suppose you woke up tomorrow and somebody knocked on your door and they said, we're from the IRS and we found out that you owe enormous back taxes. Now, maybe they're wrong or whatever. And we've already emptied out your bank account, savings and checking. And we've emptied out your retirement plan. And we're here now to seize your house. That's a desert.
Yes.
That's a desert. Now,
It is.
and now, when they take all that from you, can they take God? No, they can't take God. But at the same time, how are you going to react? Are you going to be like, start to fight and cuss and shoot and kick and where's my gun? Are you going to come? Or are you going to go to God? And you still may have to just let them take you. They're gonna take the keys. They're gonna put your furniture out on the street, and it could be all a mistake. Maybe they got you mistaken with somebody else, whatever. Because the devil don't care. The devil don't play fair. But in the meantime, while they're still in the mistake, you're being thrown out, and your account is empty. You are in the desert. So I try to equate natural stuff that we would experience today to them. Sometimes we just think, okay, they're walking through the desert, they should be okay. No, they just got evicted, man. They just out. You know, I supposed to be in that house. That's the house of milk and honey, and that's my bank account where I had, you know, extra water to feed and clothes, and I don't have anything. I can't buy a sandwich now. Now.
And a lot of times the first thing we'll say, Lord, why you let this happen to me?
That's exactly what they did. And say, I wish I remember back before I even got saved, I had money, and they start thinking about all that. So when we put ourselves in that situation, and we say, if I was to go through that, I hope and pray I could just lean on God. I'm not going to be happy. I'm not going to enjoy it. But will I learn to just lean on God while they're taking my furniture out my house, putting it on the street?
I think even more so that can happen. That desert place is going to be in our emotions, in our minds, going forward. And then we have to, that's 24/7, nonstop, continuously. And we're going to have to reach and dig deep and hold on to God and say, I trust God. Because there's nowhere to turn, using that example, you be, somebody, the IRS is putting you out and stuff. Somebody could come along and say, maybe I can help you. But when it's in your emotions and you're in a desert place in your emotions, ain't that... Nobody can help you but God.
You're gonna need God, and that's true, because when you have emotional pain and emotional scars, when you're dealing with situations, somebody where you dealing with a loved one or a family member or a friend that
they all turn their back on you.
And next thing you know, you all kind of like being accused and things, and you're like, no, this is not how it is, and maybe there's a big misunderstanding, but you're still feeling what? Empty and void. All right.
Yeah, well, you see, I see, like when Miss Brittany said, even though all this happened to you, of course you're going to be mad. I mean, the first thing you're going to say, Lord, why you let this happen to you? What did I do? Why is this happening to me? It's all right to say that. Mm-hmm. It's all right to say that. It's all right to feel that way, because everyone has their own feelings. Exactly. But after you feel that way and you say it, and you express it to God, then you pray. Mm-hmm. Because all that anger is going to come out no matter what.
Yeah.
That anger is going to be there.
Yeah. All right. You let Regina. She's singing her good song.
No.
So, but I think,
like I said, that's the beauty of building your faith.
Yes, it is. You gotta build.
You want to see if you're gonna build your faith now. If you're gonna trust me. After you say all you want to say and you're all upset, after you express to me the way you feel, now are you gonna ask me for help? Or are you gonna keep blaming?
That's right. Are you gonna stay frustrated, or are you gonna just lean on me?
Right.
Well, let's look at what happens here. Look at verse 13. So, in verse 13 said, this is the water of Meribah, because the children of Israel strove with the Lord, and he was sanctified in them. So, now, this is where they complained, they strove with God, and God had to show him who he was. All right? Again, verse 14, look at this. And Moses sent messengers unto Kadesh. So now we kind of turning the page. We dealt with that, right? He sent messages from Kadesh unto the king of Edom. Now, Edom. Who was Edom? Edom comes from Esau. Right? All right. Now remember Esau and Jacob? Remember when Esau was out hunting, and he came back what? All hungry, and Jacob was making what? Some stew. Remember that story? And Esau said, let me have some of your stew. And Jacob said, well, I can't give it to you unless you give me your what? Your birthright.
Birthright.
And he said, I'm here starving and ready to die, and you talking about a birthright? And so he didn't want to. He said, I'm not going to give you what you want unless you give me what? What I want.
Your birthright.
All right. So let's keep that in mind. Now this isn't Esau. Esau's already dead and buried. It's like Jacob, but down there, here's their descendants. Okay. So now, so they came to the king of Edom. Thus saith thy brother Israel. So they recognize, hey, we're brothers. Well, this is like Jacob and Esau. Well, we're like brothers. So Moses comes to them and says, hey, we're brothers. Let's talk this out. We got an issue here, and we want to share it with you. And look what he says. Thou knowest all the travail. So what he does is he goes through all this travail that held us. In verse 15, he says how our fathers were in Egypt and how they were there for a long time and how they were vexed. And in verse 16, he says, and when we cried unto the Lord, he heard our voice and he sent the angel and he brought us out of Egypt. And he says, behold, we are in Kadesh. That's where they are now. A city in the uttermost of thy borders. We're right at your borders. Look at 17. Let us pass, I pray thee, through thy country. We will not pass through the fields or through the vines. Neither will we drink of the water of your well, and we will go by the king's highway. In other words, we're going to go the way that it's a paved way. I like that, though. They said we're going to travel the king's highway. It's a nice little phrase, isn't it? So we're going to stay on the paved road. We're not going to go outside the road. We will not turn to the right or to the left. So what he's saying is, let us through. We don't need your fields. We don't need your vineyards. We don't need your water. We will stay on the hard, often traveled road, the King's Highway. And we won't move to the left, nor will we move to the right until we have passed your borders. All right, verse 18. And Edom said unto him, thou shalt not pass by me. So he basically said what? No. All right. So now let me pause here. Moses asked to go through Edom so they can get to where they're trying to get to, so they don't got to travel the mountainous routes. And Edom says no. What should be the next thing? What have we learned when you enter into obstacles and things are not happening the way they should?
He didn't pray.
Exactly.
That was the problem before he did that in the first place.
He should have done it.
He went to him.
That's
He should have. I mean, really? He should have just said, God, I got an issue here, man. I'm dropping it. Can you open the door?
Exactly.
See, the mountain's not going to move because you say move. I don't care how much faith you got. The mountain's not going to move. God has to say, did you hear what she said? Open up. And he didn't do that.
He didn't
and we still do that. See, I hear what we're saying, but we still act the same way.
Yes, we
The
are.
only difference between us and them is Christ came.
Yeah.
So now I can still act the same way, not purposely, but I still do. And I say, oh, God, forgive me, I have sinned. And he goes, no problem, girlfriend. I know you was going to do that. The door is open.
That's right.
Right.
Only difference. The
Exactly.
only difference. Thank you, Jesus, because I'd have never made it back then. Never.
Right.
That's right.
Right. Like I said, we got to show our frustration.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
what we're going to do. Thank you, Cheryl.
Yep. So, but let's look at what happens here. And it says, and Edom said unto them, thou shalt not pass lest I come out against thee with the sword. So Edom's like, you get my border, I'm coming at you with a sword. It's going to be a battle. We're going to have a war. All right? Look at what happens. It's not what Cheryl said. It's not the way we think it should be. Look at what they do. You think they would know better. Verse 19. And the children of Israel said unto him, we will go by the highway. So now what they're doing, they're going to say the exact same thing over again to the same person. They're not changing. And you know that old phrase that says the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and looking for different results.
That's right.
And
That's
what
right.
they just going to do the same thing. Look at what he's going to do. He's going to say, and the children of Israel said unto him, we will go by the highway. This time they don't even call it the king's highway. They just said, we're going to go by the highway. And if I or the cattle drink of the water. So now they said, okay, well maybe we might drink of the water a little bit. But if we do drink of the water, then we'll pay you. So now they're offering them what? Money. We'll pay for it. We will only, without doing anything else, go through on foot. We're not going to try to do anything sneaky. We're just going to walk through. And he said, thou shalt not go through. And Edom came out against him with much people and with a strong hand. In other words, Edom said, well, I said I want to bring out the sword. Now I'm lining my folks up, because if you come through here, we're going to swing the sword. So he brought his army out to line up by the border and said, you come on in here if you want to. You're going to end up with a fight. You think they would still go to God? Did not do it. Look at 21. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through the border. Wherefore Israel turned away from him. So Israel turned away. Israel didn't turn to God. Israel turned away. I just find that interesting. And then I try to apply that to myself. How many times do I guess it ain't going to work. But did I give it to God? Because sometimes we will close a chapter. We will, this is done. And boy, have I been guilty of that. It's like, it ain't going to happen. And then you recognize, no, God can do all kinds of things. We just got to learn to trust him. We don't believe in how big God is. We see a very narrow God. And if we can't figure it out in our own mind, we think it can't be done. Now we can figure out that I can think of how God can do this particular miracle and it can happen. But sometimes we can't even think of a miracle that God can do that can fix the problem. But that still don't mean God can't do it. He can do all things, and we sometimes forget that. 22. And the children of Israel, even the whole congregation, journeyed from Kadesh and came unto Mount Hor. So now they got to do what? They got to climb the mountains. Why did they go to God? Because this scripture is pointing out us. It's pointing out what humans do. It's trying to help us to understand this is how people act in a congregation and even individually. In small groups, big groups, by themselves, gangs, and in nations. People act like this. We forget God.
See right here, instead of going to God, you're trying to go a different way.
Yeah, well, we're going to change a different way. And then go a different way without even asking God to lead. But what happened to them, like Haywood had said earlier, what happened to them following the cloud of fire by day, the cloud by day and the fire by night? What happened to all of that approaches? Sometimes we lose our enthusiasm.
Right, but it just goes to show. They're not looking up to God. That's why they don't see the cloud.
That's right.
They don't see the cloud because they're not looking up to God to pray.
Exactly.
But they don't see the cloud.
Well, if you don't have faith, you won't see it.
Right.
23. And the Lord spake unto Moses and Aaron in the Mount Hor by the coast of the land of Edom, saying, Aaron shall be gathered unto his people, for he shall not enter into the land which I have given unto the children of Israel, because ye rebelled against my word at the waters of Meribah. So when God told Moses and Aaron to speak to the rock, and Moses went out there and talked, Aaron is being held accountable too. And he says, well, you're not going in, Aaron. You're going to die. And you're going to die on this mountain that you decided to go to when you decided to talk to Edom, and you decided to negotiate with Edom, and then you decided to turn away, and now you decided to go to Mount Hor, and guess what's going to happen? That's when Aaron's going to die. 25. Take Aaron and Eleazar his son, and bring them unto Mount Hor, and strip Aaron. All right, take it away. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing in a sense because Aaron's going to do what? He's going to die. To be absent from the body is to be present with the Lord. We're not taking any of this stuff with us. But it's sad in the sense that in his death, he's being, all of his things that represents his confidence and allegiance and faith in God is being ceremoniously taken off. Strip Aaron of his garments and put them on Eleazar, his son. And this is the good thing. Well, at least what I did have will actually be able to be used by my son, by my children. My children have something that I have given. All right? But guess what happens? God has to allow it to be removed. And God has to say, I'm going to give it to your son. And that obviously, if you're a parent, you're looking at that and you're going, well, I know I have to go, but I'm glad my son has the relationship now with God that I once had. And that's where you can die and be at peace. If you're a parent, you understand that. And Aaron shall be gathered unto his people and shall die here. Look at that. This is the end. Sometimes you get to know. Before, Aaron wasn't suddenly struck dead. He was let know, you're going to go up to this mountain and you're not coming back down. Okay. Look at 27. And Moses did as the Lord commanded, and they went up unto the Mount Hor in the sight of all the congregation. Everybody knew this is it for Aaron. And there's so much we can say about going up to the mountain. And it talks, when you go up to the mountain, it speaks a lot about death. Jesus went up to the Golgotha. Remember when when Abraham took Isaac up to the mountain to offer him up. Right? So there's that whole aspect of, that you could do a whole study on that about going up to the mountain and dealing with death and sacrifice. So they went up to the mountain in front of all the congregation. Look at 28. And Moses stripped Aaron of his garment and put him on Eleazar his son, and Aaron died. Just like God said. Aaron died there in the top of the mount, and Moses and Eleazar came down from the mountain. Who came down from the mountain? Only Moses and Eleazar. Aaron was still up there as a corpse. He died. So he went to go be with the Lord. He went into eternity from that mountain. And like I said, there's a lot we could talk about that, and I probably will down the road when we see this again, because we're going to see this more than once. And our final verse here says, and when all the congregation saw that Aaron was dead, they mourned for Aaron 30 days, even all the houses of Israel. So all the houses of Israel mourned for Aaron. Now, I want to close with this. Remember when I opened up this chapter and I said Miriam died and there was no eulogy? There was nothing? But here for Aaron, we see that for 30 days. This was a long funeral.
That's a long one.
I mean, they talked about all his goodness. They mourned him for 30 days. And so it's interesting sometimes how people interact and how they're remembered. There's a lot to say about what you can feed or read into that. And I don't think I have a corner on what it means, but I just think it's interesting to point out that some people die and they move on, and some people die and they pause. Yes, sir.
Well, just like you were saying earlier, like when God has you to speak to someone. Now, it's just like Moses is the Lord, Aaron's the priest. So, when Moses started to try to discipline people, that's when Aaron, this is what I feel. That's when Aaron should have said, Moses, that's not your job. Mm-hmm. This is God's job.
Yeah.
This is not our job to do. And so I look back, and the way I try to analyze it, and I think, because Aaron didn't show his priesthood to Moses, mm-hmm. maybe that's why God said, listen, I need to bring you home with me. Mm-hmm. Yep. That's what I get from it.
Yep. And you're right, because they were a team. Now, Moses is going to get the same thing. It's just that he's going to get it later. He's going to go up into, later on, we're going to see him going up into a mountain, and we're going to see him doing the same thing that happened here. All right? But the key that we keep in mind is that the responsibilities that we have, the actions that we do, will produce a legacy. They're going to mean something to people. And Aaron's action of being the priest of God meant something to the people. And it didn't stop God's judgment.
No.
But the people did recognize. And sometimes it's sad, but a lot of times we wait till people die before we actually say, you know what? This person was really a good person. This person. Now, not everybody can say that. Yes, Penny.
I don't. I know death is like finite and stuff like that, but I see God's judgment of death saying, "It's time for you to come on into rest.
Mm-hmm.
Let me bring you home." I still see love
Yes.
in that action.
Very good point.
Because he's like saying, it's a lot of work dealing with these people that I created. And there's only so much that you can do because you're not God.
Wow.
Let me bring you home, my child, because it's time. So I just see God loving Aaron right there, loving Miriam, and then loving Moses, because yes, it takes a lot to deal with God's people and all this sin that the frustration and suffering. Nobody can do that but God.
Did y'all hear that?
So he's just showing love. He's saying, "Come home, my child. It's time for you to rest."
She just flipped that coin on the other side. Did y'all hear that?
Yeah.
So what she's saying is that, the love of God, because remember we were saying how God loved the people, and Moses shouldn't have been upset with the people because he still loved the people in their sins. And what Miss Penny just pointed out was, don't forget the love of God even operated when he pronounced death on Moses and Aaron. That's a very good point, and I'm so glad she pointed it out because that's so true. Because
Aaron went as far as he could.
Because what she's saying is, God is saying, I know you as a human being can't handle these people like I can, because I'm God. And all these people are going to do is get you frustrated. They're going to get you angry. And so I'm going to have you go until you reach your point of, well, I can't handle this anymore. And then God will sometimes say, well, I'm going to solve this by bringing you on home. And so he didn't cut them off.
Oh.
He brought them home.
But the beauty of it is, he gave Aaron's priestly garments to his son, so you can go down. Now, this is as far as I took your father. Now, I want you to help Moses the rest of the way.
Yeah.
And that's what Wayne was saying, the legacy.
When Moses starts acting up again, you can look back and remember and say, Moses, this ain't what God telling us to do.
That's right. And that's
step back, like Miss Penny said, smell the coffee.
Yep.
And
I think that's sometimes that we have to try to keep in mind. And what Miss Penny just pointed out, that God's love operates everywhere, even in the midst of it's time for you to die. Because remember, and wow, this is really good. When Jesus was on the cross, and that thief that said, "Remember me when thou come into thy kingdom," the Lord said, "Today you're going to be with me in paradise." But guess what? Jesus still let the man die. He still died on the cross. As a matter of fact, he got his legs broken when Jesus just gave up the ghost. But the scripture says they had to break the legs of the other people on the cross so that they would not be able to stand up and they could suffocate and die quicker. So Jesus allowed him to still be on the cross, still die, get his legs broken, but I'll see you in paradise. And that's kind of like what you can think that the Lord is kind of bringing with Aaron and with Moses and with Miriam. Y'all got to come home now, but y'all going to come out of the flesh and go into the spirit. And yes, I need to remove you because you are no longer operating the way I want you to operate. You're getting out of character. You're getting out of the way that you should be because you're getting frustrated because things don't go godly the way you want them to go. Why? Because we're not living in heaven right now. That's why Jesus said we should pray that God's will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Because right now, it is not happening. And when we get frustrated because it's not happening, we sometimes don't always do it and handle things properly. This was a good chapter. I thank God for everybody's comments. And this is how I love it when people can bring out insights like that, because it helps us to see things from a variety of perspectives. So I thank God for each and every one of you. Anybody else have anything else they want to add to this?
You see, just one more thing. You see, just like before, when I was going through and you told me, Wayne, it's all right. God already knows you're upset with him. Mm-hmm. So instead of me sitting here saying, mumbling, yeah, he ain't doing this and he ain't doing that, he already know I'm going to say that. Mm-hmm. But do I hold it? Do I hold it and say, Lord, help me? Yes. Instead of saying you're hindering me, ask for his help. Right. And see, as we go through more and more books, it's more and more that I see how this thing right here, mm-hmm. this thing that's underneath this, mm-hmm. Oh man, that thing is messed up.
Yes, it is.
They say you have all parts of the brain. Uh-huh. Ain't none of them no good.
That's right.
Ain't none of them no good. If you don't put God right here, that's right. This thing ain't never gonna be right.
Yep. It says it's ever learning and never coming into the knowledge of the truth. That is true. That is true. All right. Thank you, sir. That's so good. Anybody else? Anything else to add? All right. With that being said, Haywood, sir, would you please give us a word of prayer?